Every year, farmers and homeowners spend hundreds of dollars replacing the same wooden posts that rotted, the same wire that rusted, and the same panels that warped, buying the same temporary solution to a boundary problem that our ancestors solved permanently 3,500 years ago with a technology that fed wildlife, filtered water, sequestered carbon, and increased crop yields while it did it. That technology is the living fence, and its systematic destruction over the last century is one of the most consequential and least discussed agricultural decisions in modern history. Not because living fences are exotic or complicated, because they are the opposite, ancient, proven, self-maintaining biological systems that required no manufacturing, no replacement, and no industrial supply chain, which is precisely why they became inconvenient when industrial agriculture and manufactured fencing companies needed farmers to buy things instead of grow them. A living fence is exactly what the name says. A fence made of plants. Not decorative plants arranged loosely along a boundary, but a deliberately managed biological barrier of interwoven, layered, sometimes thorned and sometimes edible plants that functions simultaneously as a physical boundary, a wildlife corridor, a carbon sink, a windbreak that measurably increases crop yields, a water filtration system, and in some species, a food and medicine source. It is the most multifunctional structure in agricultural history, and it has been progressively bulldozed out of existence since the 1870s, when barbed wire became cheap enough to replace it economically, and especially since the 1940s and 1950s, when government policy on both sides of the Atlantic actively incentivized its removal. The archaeological evidence for living fences predates Julius Caesar's documentation of them by over 1,500 years, and the continuity of the practice across that time span tells you something important about how well it actually worked. Archaeological evidence of managed hedgerow systems has been dated to approximately 1500 BC in Britain, placing the practice firmly in the Bronze Age. These were not casual plantings along field margins. They were deliberately laid, regularly managed biological barriers that required skilled knowledge to establish and maintain, and that were passed down through generations of farming communities as fundamental agricultural infrastructure rather than optional land improvement. When Julius Caesar arrived in Gaul in 57 BC and encountered the nervy tribe's defensive hedges, he documented them not as primitive local practice, but as an impressive and ancient engineering solution that his Roman military forces found genuinely difficult to breach. His description in the Gallic Wars notes hedges of interwoven, thorny plants so dense and established that they functioned as fortifications, documenting a technique that was already ancient in his time. This is a hedge that had been managed long enough and skillfully enough to serve military defensive purposes, which gives you a sense of both the density achievable through proper laying technique and the time investment that communities were willing to make in these structures because the return justified it. The specific laying technique that Caesar was describing, the practice of partially cutting established stems and weaving them horizontally through vertical stakes to create an impenetrable interlocked structure, is the same technique that traditional hedge layers in Britain and Ireland still practice today in competitive hedge laying events that preserve the craft knowledge developed over 3 millennia of continuous use. The technique produces a hedge that is denser, more wind-resistant, and more stock-proof than a simply planted row of shrubs, and it is the management practice that distinguishes a properly functioning living fence from a loose planting that provides only partial boundary function. The ecological case for living fences is not anecdotal or theoretical. It is documented, measured, and specific enough to put numbers on the agricultural value that 3 generations of removal policies have cost farming communities. The windbreak effect of established hedgerows on crop yields has been measured in field trials across multiple countries and multiple crop types. And honestly, the consistent finding is an 18 to 22% yield improvement in fields with hedgerow windbreaks compared to open fields of equivalent soil quality and management. This yield improvement is not the result of any input the hedgerow adds to the soil. It is the result of reduced wind stress on crops, more consistent soil moisture retention in the wind shadow of the barrier, and the moderated microclimate that the temperature buffering effect of a dense vegetated boundary creates on both sides. For a farm with significant hedgerow coverage, this yield differential represents a substantial annual production advantage that, well, no purchased input replicates. The hedgerow is infrastructure, not input, and unlike infrastructure that depreciates with age, a mature hedgerow appreciates. It becomes denser, more established, more effective as a windbreak, and more ecologically complex with every decade of management. The water filtration function of hedgerow root systems has been documented specifically in the context of agricultural runoff management. The dense, deep root systems of established hedgerow plants intercept and process runoff from adjacent fields, removing nitrogen, phosphorus, and pesticide compounds before they reach watercourses. This is not a marginal effect. Studies of hedgerow buffer strips alongside agricultural land show nutrient removal efficiencies in the range of 50 to 80% for nitrogen compounds, which, honestly, is a filtration performance that engineered water treatment infrastructure achieves at significant capital and operating cost. The hedgerow does it for free, continuously, while also functioning as a boundary marker, a wildlife corridor, and a windbreak. Moringa's specific contribution to this system really deserves separate attention because it actually goes beyond the general filtration function that, any dense-rooted hedgerow plant provides. Moringa seeds contain a compound called Moringa oleifera cationic protein, which has been documented in water purification research as an effective natural flocculant, meaning it causes suspended particles and certain microbial contaminants to clump together and settle out of water. Traditional communities in regions where moringa grows natively have used crushed moringa seeds to treat turbid water for centuries, and, laboratory analysis has confirmed exactly how this works. A moringa living fence along a watercourse isn't just filtering runoff through root uptake. The seeds falling from the hedge are actively processing the water they land in. The destruction of Britain's hedgerow network and America's living fence traditions in the 20th century was not an agricultural accident. It was policy, and the policy served industrial interests at a measurable cost to farming communities and ecosystems that, honestly, are still paying that cost today. Britain's 1947 Agriculture Act introduced subsidies and incentives that were specifically structured to reward field enlargement and the removal of the field boundaries, primarily hedgerows, that divided traditional farmland into the smaller plots that pre-mechanized farming required. The policy was explicitly designed to create fields large enough for the heavy machinery that post-war industrial agriculture was scaling into, and, it worked. Between 1945 and 1990, England lost approximately half of its ancient hedgerow network, roughly 120,000 miles of established biological infrastructure that, in many cases, represented centuries of continuous management. The biodiversity collapse that followed has been documented extensively. Farmland bird species that depended on hedgerow nesting and foraging habitat declined by between 30 and 60% over the same period. Small mammal populations in agricultural landscapes tracked the hedgerow losses with similar declines. In the United States, the story runs in parallel, but with different policy mechanisms. Earl Butz, Secretary of Agriculture under Nixon, promoted the fencerow fencerow-to-fencerow production philosophy as a response to global food demand and commodity price incentives, effectively encouraging farmers to plow every available acre and remove the field margins, fence lines, and boundary plantings that broke up their operational continuity. The Osage orange hedges that had defined field boundaries across the American Midwest since the 1840s, the most extensive living fence network in American history, had already been losing ground to barbed wire since the 1870s, when Joseph Glidden's patent made manufactured fencing cheaper per mile than maintaining a living boundary. By the mid-20th century, the 60,000 miles of Osage orange hedge that had once structured the agricultural landscape of the central United States existed only in remnant patches along roadsides and fence lines, too inconvenient to have been removed. The modern revival of living fence systems is not a nostalgic gesture. It is a practical response to the agricultural and ecological failures that their removal caused, and the results from working farms that have rebuilt them are specific enough to be compelling. Mark Shepard's New Forest Farm in Wisconsin is the most extensively documented large-scale demonstration of restored perennial agricultural systems, including living fences in the American context. Shepard's 200-acre farm, managed on permaculture design principles that place woody perennials, including hedge species, as structural components of the agricultural system rather than field margin afterthoughts, has documented crop production, livestock integration, and ecological restoration outcomes that really challenge the conventional assumption that maximum yield requires maximum field exposure. The hedge and windbreak systems that structure New Forest Farm's field layout contribute to the yield stability that allows the farm to be profitable in years when open field commodity operations in the same region experience significant losses from weather events that the farm's biological infrastructure, helps to moderate. Jeff Lawton's Greening the Desert project in Jordan's Jordan Valley demonstrated the living fence principle in perhaps the most challenging possible environment, establishing productive food forest systems in a region receiving less than 200 millimeters of annual rainfall, using hedgerow windbreaks to create the protected microclimate that allowed the interior food production system to establish. The project produced harvestable food within 2 years of establishment in a location where most agricultural analysis would have predicted failure, specifically because the windbreak and boundary planting system modified the microclimate enough to make the interior conditions survivable for productive plants. Establishing your own living fence really does require some thoughtful planning before you even think about planting. And, honestly, the species choices that determine its function need to be made well before the first cutting goes in the ground. Checking local regulations is, the practical first step that most guides mention, but let's be honest, most people end up skipping it. Homeowners association rules and municipal zoning codes can vary quite a bit in how they treat living boundaries, and, the distinction between a plant boundary and a manufactured fence is handled differently in different places. Many codes that restrict fence height, interestingly, have no provisions covering living plantings, which means a living fence can often achieve heights and densities that manufactured fencing regulations simply wouldn't allow. Confirming this before you start planting prevents that really frustrating situation where you spend several seasons establishing a hedge only to be required to remove it. Willow is the species for growers who need rapid establishment and are willing to manage aggressively just to keep it in bounds. It roots from cuttings with near-perfect reliability, grows several feet in its first season from an established cutting, and can be woven, bent, and trained into the living fence structure within 2 to 3 growing seasons. The limitation, though, is that willow requires regular management to stop it from becoming a large tree rather than a managed hedge, and it definitely prefers moist soil conditions that not all sites can provide. Now, hawthorn is the species for long-term stock-proofing and wildlife value in temperate climates. It grows more slowly than willow but becomes significantly denser and more impenetrable over time, provides exceptional wildlife nesting and foraging habitat, produces edible berries that can be harvested for culinary use, and once properly established through traditional laying technique, is virtually indestructible as a boundary. A properly laid hawthorn hedge, managed on a 10 to 15-year rotation of hard laying and regrowth, is a permanent boundary solution that actually improves with each laying cycle. Moringa is the species for warm climate growers who want really the fastest possible establishment combined with the nutritional and water purification properties that make it uniquely functional in this role. It grows from seed or cutting, reaches several meters in its first season in warm climates, and can be cut back hard annually to maintain hedge form while producing the leaf material that makes it, simultaneously a food source, livestock feed, and the water treatment agent its seeds provide. The establishment cost of a living fence is primarily in the first 3 years of management. After that, the system is self-sustaining in a way that no manufactured fencing ever is, and honestly, it improves rather than degrades with every season that passes. A barbed wire fence purchased today will cost money again in 10 years when it rusts through. A hawthorn hedge planted today will be denser, more productive, and more ecologically valuable in 10 years than it is now. The comparison is not between two fencing options. It is between a depreciating asset and an appreciating one, and the 3,500-year track record of the appreciating one speaks clearly enough that it really shouldn't require rediscovery in every generation. Subscribe. We cover the agricultural knowledge that compounds in value every season you apply it. See you in the next one.